Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, senior colleagues. Thank you for the opportunity to come here and talk to you this morning. During the course of this presentation, which will be about 25-30 minutes, I hope, I want to lay out really what the research says, because it's very difficult to understand what the quantum of cybercrime is, but there is sufficient research out there that if you put it together in one place, does give you an idea of the magnitude of it. I want to talk to you about what we're doing as part of the police e-crime programme, and I want to pose a challenge to you as senior colleagues at the end. I appreciate it's very difficult as a senior officer, talking to chief officers, talking to senior superintendent colleagues, to talk about emerging threat in a period of austerity, and I've had many challenges back from colleagues to say, actually, we need to understand the quantum of this, you're overstating it, and I genuinely don't think I am. I genuinely think there's a real and emerging issue for policing here that some of us are waking up to, some colleagues are very aware of, much more aware than I, but I'm not sure across senior leadership in policing we've really understood what this means for us. And before we get to the question and answer session at the end, please don't ask me about botniks or phishing, because I don't come at this as a technician, as a specialist. I come at this as a police officer who's dedicated his professional career to protecting communities. And it's in that context that I've taken on leadership in relation to cybercrime. Okay, can I start off with a bit of a straw poll? And this is a bit risky because it can go one way or the other. But when I've done this in the past, I've been surprised and people have been surprised about how it ends up. And if it doesn't go the right way for me, I've got an excuse anyway. So, quick question to you all in the audience. During the course of the last 3 years, who here has been a victim of traditional acquisitive crime? Burglary, dwelling, car broken into. Put your hands up, please. Okay, probably 20 hands in the room. During the same period of time, who here has been a victim of crime online? Had your identity stolen? Had your bank account broken into, had emails sent to you with begging letters, which are clearly... Okay, you'll see, and I don't need to use my excuse, because what I would have said if I hadn't got the right number of hands was, well, actually, it's happened to you and you don't know about it. But, you know, we do know from that cyber-enabled, internet-related criminality is all over the world, is all over the UK, and affects all of us and affects all of the communities we serve. And that's why I think it's important. And I'll say this again a bit later in the presentation, and it's a challenge you may want to pose to the Home Secretary later, who revels in the fact that crime is coming down. I would pose the challenge that crime isn't coming down, certainly acquisitive crime isn't coming down, crime is changing. And much of the criminality which takes place through organised crime groups, is volume crime, is no longer taking place in the real world, but it's taking place in the cyber-enabled space. And actually, there is a new criminality and there is a new victimology that we in the service need to respond to. Okay, hopefully I can move this forward. Okay, firstly, understanding the threat. Let me try and paint the picture for you around this. We live our lives online. That's a very easy thing to say, and I think we all accept that. You know, commerce relies upon the internet. Industry relies upon the internet. We rely upon it, not just for our social lives, but for our entertainment, but also for our own personal finances and personal affairs. The internet is a huge part of all of our lives. And I would say the younger you are year by year, the more it is influential. Because the likes of my generation, you know, it's only been part of our lives for 10, 15 years. But for my children, your children, younger people, it's been part of their lives since they've started, and they're much more capable and much more agile in their use of the internet. But let's put some figures around that. This is in the UK. 4 out of 5 homes have access to the internet. 2 out of 5 adults currently have smartphones. On average, each household has 3 internet-enabled devices. Annual retail sales and that's online shopping, were 2.6 billion last year, and that was a 30% growth on the year before. And by the end of this year, the estimates are that worldwide network devices will outnumber humans by 6 to 1. It's 8% of our GDP at the moment. £121 billion was internet-enabled commerce in 2010. 3 billion people will be using the internet worldwide by 2016, and there were 44 million known cyber attacks in 2011 in the UK. I was with a chief executive of a major company the other week, and I won't mention the company because it's probably commercially sensitive, but he estimates they have cyber attacks on their company at least 24 times a day. 24 times a day, trying to steal their intellectual property rights, trying to get some of the commercial secrets that they have, trying to disrupt their internet operations 24 times a day, and that's just in the UK. And guess what? He doesn't report it. Estimated cost of cybercrime was 27 billion in a report by Detica that they did for the Cabinet Office in 2011, and that's 2% of GDP. And you'll see the breakdown there to business, government, and to Joe Public. That report has been a little discredited after it was published, so don't rely absolutely on that, but there's some very good data and very good analysis in there about the quantum of this. And cybercrime and cybersecurity are now a national security strategy tier 1 threat, viewed more likely and more harmful than a nuclear attack, viewed more likely and more harmful than serious and organised crime. Some other sources of research. Measuring the cost of cybercrime by Anderson and others, a very good piece of research. And it says it can't measure the cost because there are so many different ways in which it happens, so many different costs around preventing it, around putting things right, subsequently about protecting organisations. It said it's very difficult to put a cost on it, but what they could say through their research is cyber is now the typical volume crime in the UK. It's no longer burglary dwelling, it's no longer theft from vehicles, it's now cyber-enabled criminality. McAfee in July 13 of this year wrote a report called The Economic Cost of Cybercrime, and again, very difficult worldwide to put an actual figure on the cost of it, but they estimated it could be up to $500 billion worldwide. $500 billion. Okay, go back to the UK. A crime survey for England and Wales in 2012. This is not the British crime survey. This is another survey, and hopefully cybercrime will go into the British crime survey in future years to help us get a real feel on the quantum of it. But the really important thing for this, and this was a decent researched piece of work with a large number of people. And the frightening thing here is 1 in 3 adults suffered online crime in the previous 12 months, whereas 1 in 5 suffered online crime. 1 in 3 suffered crime online in their experience, in their perception. 1 in 5 suffered it offline, which goes right back to the straw poll I did at the beginning, which is we are much more likely to be victims of crime online. And that poses a real question for us as leaders of the service, which I'll go into in a bit more detail later. But actually, are we configured appropriately to respond to that? Do we think a 43-force structure based upon geographic, physical criminality is the right response to this? Do we think we have the skills, the people with the technical skills to prevent, to investigate, to protect? Do we think have the right kind of investment? Where does this sit in your strategic assessments yearly or half-yearly, how often you do them? Where does this sit in the PCC's crime and policing plans? Whereabouts is this having a really strategic impact on what you do day to day as leaders, and how are you influencing? Because all of those 1 in 3 adults who suffered online crime is a member of your community in whatever form or other, they're a member of the community, and they deserve protecting, and they deserve policing services in this area just as much, if not more, than people who are victims in the physical world. And again, just another small illustrative example, Federation of Small Businesses. It was actually May of this year. I've got it wrong on that particular slide. Said 41% of their members suffered cybercrime in the last 12 months at a cost of £800 million. And of those who had been victims of cybercrime, of that 41%, 20% had taken absolutely no steps to protect themselves. And it's interesting because when you look at cybersecurity and cyber protection, the likes of the big multinational, international companies, you look at what they're doing and they've invested because they have the quantum, the kind of cash within the businesses to properly invest in protecting themselves, and they have to because of their international reputations. Where people aren't investing is the small, medium-sized enterprises which have small turnovers who frankly can't build this into the balance sheet and they're vulnerable. Or it's the members of the public who either don't know they need to protect themselves or don't want to outlay the expense of protecting themselves. And the reason I called leaving the back door open is, you can use the analogy of a house or of a car, but I'm still amazed that you can walk into a high street shop or even shop on the internet and buy a computer or internet-enabled device, whether it's a tablet, a laptop, a computer game, whatever it is, and walk out that shop without any protection. And the analogy I use is, would you really walk into a car dealership and say, you know what, I quite fancy that car in that particular model, but if I got the choice of having it for 100 quid less, I'll have it without doors, please. Because that's exactly what we're doing in the cyber world at the moment. We are allowing internet service providers to provide services without proper protection, and we're allowing the sellers of hardware to sell a back door into your house, into your world, without any kind of protection. And I was at a conference recently within industry where a guy who stood up, who'd got a background in understanding cyber-enabled criminality, and for £137 off the internet, off the supermarkets that we can't talk about on the internet, he'd been able to purchase all that he needed to be able to get into an iPhone, find out all the passwords within the iPhone, and get from there into the bank account. And he illustrated it on stage for £137. And he wasn't a computer engineer, he wasn't cracking programs. He's saying any A-level student who understands the internet, who understands computer science, will be able to do this very easily. Okay, and the real shame in all of this, GCHQ report, which was produced a couple of years ago, said 8% of the cybercrime that we know about is easily preventable by just buying and maintaining the software that you need for a computer throughout the period of its life. 80% is easily preventable. And I genuinely think, and this is some of my conversations with government, we have to put more pressure on those people who are selling hardware, that they sell it with that kind of protection that's there for the lifetime of that particular computer. And then the people we need to protect, the communities we need to protect, will be in a much better situation than they currently are. Okay, so I've given you access to some of the research, some of the evidence, and I know I've put anecdotes up there, but all of those come from, academically well-founded research, both here and abroad. And I can't tell you the quantum. I can't tell you if it's 27 billion in the UK or not. But I can tell you it affects everybody's lives, and it's big, and it's growing. And at some point, I think we'll reach a critical stage where the public will quite rightly ask, what is law enforcement doing to protect me from becoming a victim of crime? Yeah, they'll do it in the real world, around domestic violence, around child sexual exploitation, around volume crime, around burglary dwelling. What are they doing to protect me? What's the leadership of the service doing? And actually, that brings into question our legitimacy to police. And I can overstate that, and I don't want to be too solemn about that, but I do believe the time's not far off where actually there'll be a critical incident, or there will be such a quantum of reporting, and I'll talk about reporting in a while, that if we're not able to provide a service around victim care, around prevention, around investigation, around protection, that actually we will lose some of our legitimacy to be the law enforcement and the protective agency for our communities. So what's it mean? For me, it means this is the new serious and organised crime. You know, we know an awful lot of cyber criminality is commissioned in, let's face it, rogue states across the world, provided through servers in different countries, through internet service providers in different countries, and affects thousands of victims both here and abroad at the same time. So yeah, it is the new serious and organised crime. And why on earth would you want to go through the front doors of a bank in an armed robbery when actually you can get the cash out through the internet? And we know that that happens. It is the new protest crime. You know, I don't want to say too much more about that, but there's a huge wave of protest crime through the internet. And more importantly for us colleagues, this is the new volume crime. You know, this is the new crime that we need to be thinking about how we deal with day in, day out. And it stretches right from Mrs. Miggins at 1 Acacia Avenue, and I use that analogy a lot. You know, what are we doing to protect our ordinary member of the public who can have their identity stolen, who can have money removed from the bank account, who can be subject to phishing, right through to big business and national security. But my focus as the ACPO need is on Mrs. Miggins at 1 Acacia Avenue, because there are other brighter, cleverer people who are thinking about the national security end. My work with you colleagues is to try and work out how we best protect our local communities. And I'll say, as I said before, crime's not so much down, it's just changing. And it's a way that's not accounted for in the crime stats, because this doesn't appear anywhere in the crime stats. You know, much in the same way as serious and organised crime doesn't. And you know, I've probably been going on for too long now to say I think the way we record crime is completely out of date, and it's not a measure of the success of policing or otherwise, because it doesn't account for so much of criminality which is out there. Okay, again, going back to basics here, Peel's first principle, and I don't know if you, like me, refer back to Peel's principles on a regular basis, just to sense check where we are with what we're doing, but I think it's important to do so. There's a strong history and tradition of policing here, which took place in a different context and time, but I think has real traction even in 2013. And the basic mission for which the police exist is to prevent crime and disorder, to protect our communities. And again, my challenge to you is, are we protecting our communities? Are we really protecting our communities? Well, Keith Vaz doesn't think we are. Home Affairs Select Committee report, which was produced, I think it was last month or the month before, said very clearly that the UK is failing to win the war on e-crime. And if you read into the report, it says that UK law enforcement is fractured and failing to respond to this new phenomenon. And I know Mr. Vaz likes sound bites, and I know there will be other views on that report, but you know what, I think he's dead right. You know, I think emotive terms like winning the war or losing the war are unhelpful, but are we ahead of the curve with this? No, we're not. Okay, I'm assuming that people come to this with the same level of knowledge that I have, so I'll do a couple of quick basics for you, and if you know this already, I do apologise, just bear with me for a moment. How is it defined, cyber? There is pure cyber, which is criminal acts which take place through the use of ICT. They are pure because the ICT is the crime. So phishing, botnets, attacks on the security of computers, those kind of things. And there's cyber-enabled. That is traditional crimes which take place through the medium of the computer. And for me, within my portfolio, the definition doesn't include things such as child exploitation, because that takes place elsewhere, and antisocial behaviour and bullying. It's very much around acquisitive criminality. And it's important to break that down because they are different things and we need to understand how we'll respond differently to them. But actually, what I'm really interested in is making sure that we're able to deal with that medium, which is the computer, the internet, the cyberspace. Okay, what has been our response so far? Well, we've not done nothing. Now, that's the case for the defence for me. There is a national cyber security programme which has provided some funding, some support and some guidance and some strategy for us. And beneath that, there's the national e-crime programme which I lead on nationally on behalf of the service. And we are making progress. So there's three big areas I want to talk about. There are other areas as well, but three big areas. The NCA comes into effect in early October this year. As part of that, we will have the new cybercrime unit or computer crime unit, people call it different things, which will bring together the PECU, the Police Central E-Crime Unit, which work within the Met, and Soccer Cyber. Now, PECU and Soccer Cyber were very different organisations. PECU tended to respond in a very much crime in action response to reports from industry about major pure cyber attacks on industry, and they were very, very good at that. Tended to be very reactive, very on the front foot, very much crime in action. Soccer Cyber tended to be a bit more strategic about understanding what the threats were that were around the world that were emerging and working with law enforcement and security partners across the world to mitigate those threats. Well, they've come together now, and they will bring those two disciplines together within the same directorate. They are bigger than they were, and the Home Office Minister talks about it being a step change in the police law enforcement response to cyber-enabled criminality. And I hope he's right. I believe he will be right, and I hope he's right as well. Because they will be about building a new international outreach. We know there are some rogue states in the world who know they have cyber criminals living there, who are quite happy to see them attack Western states and will leave them unfettered, provided they don't attack their own state systems or their own internet security. Well, we're starting to have conversations, the NCCU are starting to have conversations with some of those states, and we're making progress. And we're forming many more international relationships. Because again, the traditional UK policing response to international criminality is about days and weeks, and this needs to be about hours and minutes. And that's the new kind of international outreach which we will get. It's an uplift in capacity and capability. There are many, many skilled people in the NCCU who have technical skills way beyond my understanding. Yeah, traditional investigators, but some technical capability who are able to do things behind the back of the box, which I wouldn't have a clue how to do. A very rare, a very important and quite expensive skill. And they'll provide a strategic lead for UK law enforcement. So when Keith Vaz talked in the Home Affairs Select Committee about our response being fractured, it's about making sure we have a much more joined up response. And actually my portfolio is now jointly chaired by me and the director of the NCCU. So we're absolutely joined up on how we respond to this in general policing and at the more specialist end. Regional capability. We've not officially had the Home Office notification of grant for this, but we've negotiated with the Home Office, the Treasury and Cabinet Office, that they will create a small capability in every region within the ROCU, and they will support that with funding. And one of my other hats is I lead nationally on National Coordination for Serious and Organised Crime, and I head up the ROCU programme for the new ROCU capabilities. And through that board, we are developing in each of your regions this small, quite bespoke, but very important foot in the door capability around cyber. And they'll do 4 key things for us. It will provide a skill base in each region. So when your force gets a report of cyber-enabled criminality or a pure cyber attack on a small, medium-sized enterprise, for example, if it's beyond your capacity and capability, we will have those skills in the region to support you in terms of investigating, in terms of bringing down websites, attacking servers and all the other things that you have to do. So it will be a skill base, a reference point in each region. It will provide cyber skills to support serious and organised crime, because within each of the ROCUs, we're building 13 different capabilities, which are 13 different approaches to mitigating risk from serious and organised crime, and cyber will be one of those. It's about increasing cyber awareness in police forces and with partners, and importantly about creating local partnerships with academia and industry, because we won't be able to do this piece of work on our own. You know, we need to harness the skills that there is in industry. And just a really quick example from the East Midlands, we've already got a small cyber capability in EMSU, our ROCU in the East Midlands. And as of next year, De Montfort University Cyber Institute, or whatever their name is, will be seconding PhD students to work within our unit. And they will help us develop techniques, help us understand risk, and help us investigate. And we will provide the right kind of work experience for them as part of their PhD. Now, we're in conversations with an international company who are based in the East Midlands, who are actively talking about seconding some of their senior analysts across to work with us because of the kudos it brings for them, because of part of their social responsibility. And again, that will bring great skilling experience for us. We need to do that at a national level through the NCCU, but we also need to do it at a regional level, because there are academic institutions in every region who have cyber schools, and there is big industry based in each of the regions, and we need to secure and grab hold of that capability. And finally, as part of the national network, so if we do have periods of extreme demand or significant demand, we can galvanise these through national tasking to respond to that. Action fraud. I'm sure everyone's heard of action fraud. I'm not sure how many people realise that it's not about action, it's about reporting, and it's not just about fraud, it's about cyber-enabled criminality as well. And the whole idea is there is a single clear route of reporting to one place for all pure cyber and cyber-enabled attacks. And hopefully, if we can get Mrs. Miggins reporting this to us, because they don't at the moment, and there's a key question for us there as to why they don't, then actually we'll for the first time we'll start to get a bit of a picture about what the quantum of this is. And we'll start to build a single intelligence picture about what cyber criminality and cyber-enabled criminality looks like. But it's not being used. You know, people still are not reporting. You know, and a lot of the reason that people isn't reporting is because they don't feel a victim. Because if you have 50 quid taken out your bank account or 50 quid taken off your credit card, then generally the institution will give you that money back at the moment and replace that money. So you actually don't feel like a victim, you feel like a transaction's gone wrong. Well, that will change. You know, now the institutions have us all banking online, you know, they no longer need in the long term to provide that kind of security. And when that goes, people will suddenly start to feel like proper victims. But they're also not reporting, because to be frank, they don't think we're able to do anything about it. They don't think we've got the skills, they don't think we understand it. And we need to change that. So we're actually able to build a proper picture of the criminality and the victimology. So even though they're not reporting, still, in May of this year, which is the latest figures I've got, and I don't pick it out because it's an exceptional month, it's just the latest figures I've got, nearly 9,000 cyber-enabled, 2,500 pure cyber crime and information reports. So 10,500-ish, I think that comes up to, reports, of which over 3,000 were sent for enforcement action to forces. I daren't tell you how few of those 3,000 were investigated, or how few of those 3,000 led to a criminal justice outcome. But let me take you into the world of other volume crime, and if we had the same kind of attrition in other areas of volume crime, we would be a failing force in the eyes of HMIC. Okay, and mainstreaming. This is where it really touches our BCU colleagues and heads of crime within forces. And I call it side to side and top to bottom, because this is about increasing awareness and skills and capability in all police forces across the country. And the NCA and the CT world are also brought into this mainstream training. And it's about making sure that our brand new recruits understand what cybercrime is, understand if they come across it what they should do, understand where they can reference people around crime prevention, and understand what victim care looks like. up to at the top of the organisation, on the strategic command course, on similar courses, to make sure that our most senior leaders in policing understand their strategic responsibilities, to understand and accept this risk and work towards mitigating it. And the side to side is making sure that we develop cyber investigative skills amongst SIOs, amongst investigators as part of the PIP courses, and also making sure that we understand what kind of response we need to give in the event there is a major cybercrime attack. So it is a comprehensive suite of training, some of it e-learning, some of it through the College of Policing direct courses, and some of it coming out in packages to all forces for in-house training, and we're currently doing the train the trainer on that at the moment. I think it's a high quality product, no matter which format it comes in. And my plea to you is, don't let it pass you by. Don't let it pass the people by who work for you and work alongside you, because there's a level of awareness and skills and capability we need to build here, and this is our first big opportunity during the course of the next 2 years. But that's a foot in the door. That's what we're doing. There are other bits I could talk about, but that's the mainstream of what we're doing. But we need to do more for all the reasons I've talked about before. And if you think about it, if one of your local officers, your local beat officers, was walking down the street today and Mrs. Miggins came out and said, I've had my identity stolen online, do you think he or she would know how to respond? Do you think he or she would know where they should report it? Do you think he or she would know how to give crime prevention advice, or understand where she can get crime prevention advice? Do you think he or she would know how that person feels as a victim? And for heads of crime, you know, if that small, medium-sized enterprise comes into you and says, I've had £50,000 of cash taken from my business, I've had my website taken down because I didn't respond to a demand for money from Hungary, do you think your investigators would know how to respond to that and investigate that and actually understand what can be done? Well, if the answer to those questions is yes, I'm really encouraged. But I suspect the answer to those questions is no. And that's why we all need to do more. And that's why we are currently starting to consult on a new strategy for UK policing, which will start to describe what should be provided at local and force level, what should be provided at regional level, what partnerships should look like. And I'm not defining what they will be. We're going to have a conference later in the year. We're going to have a series of workshops around the country to work with colleagues, practitioners, leaders, to understand what our response should really be. So my challenge to you, which I referred to at the beginning, is as senior leaders in the service, as senior stakeholders with your ACPO teams, what are you doing to increase your understanding? What are you doing to carry out our Pelian responsibilities? And what are you doing to protect Mrs. Miggins at 1 Acacia Avenue? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Okay, I personally found that staggering, some of those figures staggering, and a fascinating discussion. So let's have some questions, please. Tom, thank you very much. Can we get a microphone to Tom? Tom Winter here, please. Thank you.
How many or what proportion of the 3,141 cases which were referred to investigation were investigated?
If I say it didn't get into three figures, it was less than 100 were actively investigated, and fewer than those, a lot fewer than that, resulted in any kind of criminal justice outcome or any mitigative action.
And just to remind us, that was out of 3,000?
Yeah.
Any response, Tom? Just staggered like I was. Absolutely. Any other questions? Carl.
Hi, Carl Kruger from Merseyside. The Prime Minister has spoken a lot about aspects of this issue recently, but how can we improve the response of ISPs and the social media sites in tackling cybercrime? And a supplementary to that, is it futile for the UK to tackle this in isolation?
Can I answer the second one first, which is yes, absolutely futile. You know, because I use the analogy of an organised crime group you know, in Russia, through an internet service provider in America, affecting victims here and abroad. How on earth can you deal with that if you haven't got the right international cooperation? So that's absolutely key. Back to the first point. When I took over this portfolio from Janet Williams, who was DAC in the Met and who genuinely, unlike me, genuinely understood it, I've realised what a crowded landscape, because there is a bit of a rush at governmental level from BIS, from the Home Office, from the Cabinet Office, from various other departments to get something done. And the National Cyber Security Programme is massive, you know, over £500 million worth of funding through that, right from what our security services are doing down to local policing. So I had to cut out a bit of space for myself, because actually there's so much going on that actually I need to be really clear about what my responsibilities were. And my responsibilities are Mrs. Miggins at 1 Acacia Avenue. And the responsibilities of, as I say, much cleverer, much more senior people than me, is dealing with the internet service providers, is dealing with the likes of Dell, who are selling computers without protection. I use Dell as one of many different companies. And actually that kind of influencing needs to be done at governmental level. You know, and we need to get to a state where, you know, when I was growing up as a young cop, I was forever going to cars where radios had been removed, because you know what, it hadn't been designed out. We need to get to a state where either through the hardware or through the internet, it's designed out. And that's a really important task to be done, but that is the job of government. But what we shouldn't do is scaremonger. Now, I can scaremonger a bit in this audience because we're senior policing professionals here, and I need us to know what our responsibilities are. But the internet is a huge force for good. You know, the whole of the nation, whether it be government or commerce, relies increasingly upon an internet that's free and works effectively. What we need to do is mitigate the risk of criminality at the bottom end.
Do you want to come back on that, Carl? Julie? Carl first.
Yeah, just to say, I think if this was in the public domain, it would be terrifying. And my mother was a subject of an attack recently, and the impact it had on her. She was the Mrs. Miggins, and there are millions of them out there.
Yeah.
The point I was going to make, Peter, was that even with international cooperation, it's still a hell of a job, isn't it? Because, I mean, some of these operations are thousands and thousands of miles away. One serves another, serves another, serves another. I mean, it's a terribly complex web you have to untangle, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, but as with all other criminality, for me, yeah, you may not get to a criminal justice outcome. You may do. You know, and there are some really good examples where the PECU has worked with law enforcement abroad that's led to the hackers abroad receiving significant prison sentences, and sentencing is another issue which I could touch upon. But it's the focus for us has to be around the victim and the community, and there is an awful lot that we can do reasonably easily to help people protect themselves.
Well, and on that point, I thought your analogy about selling a car or buying a car without doors was brilliant. I mean, what stage are we at in talking to retailers about, and talking to government about ensuring that there's legislation or whatever it takes to make it absolutely certain that when you buy one of these things, you buy yourself protection, because it's not just protecting you, it's protecting the whole of the economy.
Yeah. Those conversations are happening. You know, James Brokenshaw, the minister that deals on this, absolutely gets and understands it. He understands the risk, and he knows exactly the conversations to have. And it's, you know, he's an extremely bright man who gets this, and that debate is ongoing. But it's about understanding the best way to do it. And sometimes legislation may not be the best way. Sometimes proper conversations, proper cooperation, proper partnership is the way to get there.
Because the suspicion, and whenever I go into a high street store and the salesperson tries to flog me some insurance, I always say, no, thank you very much, Nick, because I immediately see it as a con. That's another difficulty you've got, isn't it?
It is.
Right, Julia.
Just focusing on the Mrs. Miggins sort of picture, I think we can easily work out what we do if Mrs. Miggins reports a burglary, and everyone can picture that and what have you. We all know, I think, that there's a problem here, and seeing the statistics that you gave about the difference between online and offline crime, that is quite staggering. It feels to me like we know there's a problem, and we know there's lots to do, and it feels like we're really far behind it. And I just wondered if you have any vision as to when you think we could get ahead of the game as a service, because it, to me, seems it's not something that we're going to do by next January. It feels like it's years away. And I just wondered if you had a view on that as to anything we could get ahead of the game on this.
Yeah, I mean, there is stuff we can do. I mean, for example, you know, we need to make it clear to all our staff that if we do come across Mrs. Miggins, that we signpost her to action fraud. Because action fraud, when you do get through to them, and I'm not saying there's a problem with the phone lines, but when people are properly signposted into them, have the skills within that reporting centre to help Mrs. Miggins, to help her get the prevention right, to make sure it's reported and recorded properly, to make sure it's passed out for investigation. My task is when it comes out from investigation to actually make sure the end-to-end process is right. So actually, when it goes to a force, the force know how to assess it. They have some skills to be able to deal with it. And my challenge to chiefs is, you know, each force should have the capabilities to deal with the volume end, which is domestic cyber criminality, where it's commissioned in this country with victims in this country. Forces should have the skills to do that. And that's a real challenge for chiefs in this time of austerity. Then at the regional level, we should be able to have some enhanced skills to deal with some of the really technical difficulties, and then be able to move up to the NCCU and to GCHQ and beyond if we need to. So it's getting the end-to-end process right for the victim. I do commend to you the mainstreaming work that we're doing, because I think that will enhance officers and police staff colleague awareness of what their responsibilities are and where to move things and how to deal with things. And it will provide some investigative skills around, and some technical skills within forces.
I mean, the other issue, of course, is the guy you talked about who has 24 attacks a day. I mean, how are you going to, well, don't say never mind Mrs. Miggins, Mrs. Miggins is very important, but how are you going to persuade big business that it's in their interest to make this public, run the risk of going to court and having their company emblazoned in national newspapers as having ripped off by 300 million quid or whatever?
Yeah, and it is a big issue at the big business end, because there are real commercial sensitivities to this. And, you know, what big institution that's dealing with your money would want you to know that actually they're losing money by the back door?
Can you win that?
There is a... Sorry?
Can you win that battle? I mean...
Yeah, we are starting to win that battle. Unfortunately, it's not in the piece of work that I've decided is mine. It belongs to Andy Archibald, who heads up the NCCU. And, you know, we already have what we call the virtual task force, which is where big business do report to us on a confidential basis the quantum, the size of the criminality that they suffer, and that's been recorded through action fraud. But we need to do more about giving big business the confidence to do proper bulk reporting.
Could you ever envisage a situation whereby you guaranteed that company anonymity in court? Would that help?
No, that couldn't help. And I don't think we'd ever get into that situation. It's about relationships. It's around confidence, and it's around how things are dealt with. Because actually, if you're a big business, you are going to be the subject of cyber attack. And actually, there's nothing to be scared of in terms of saying that. It's about how you respond and work with law enforcement partners to respond to that. And that's the message we're trying to give very strongly.
Gentleman here, yes, sir.
Sean Wilson, Met Police. The scale and pace of change in the IT world, particularly in smartphone technology, you're seeing now with a whole host of things that are now coming up, is amazing. Is there anything that we can do, or yourselves can do from your level, around legislative change that will assist police forces, both nationally and internationally, to confront that?
Internationally is really interesting, because there's an agreement called the Budapest something or other, I can't remember it now, which is about how we share information and how we work cooperatively to deal with cybercrime. And that works really effectively, but it's the subject of challenge from some countries who are less attuned to it. I think the big thing domestically, legislatively, we should do is look at the Computer Misuse Crime Act, or whatever it's called, because actually you can steal an awful lot of money, you can cause an awful lot of harm in the modern cyber world, where the only act that's out there to deal specifically with it was envisaged 30 years ago. And you can imagine what computers were like 30 years ago when that Computer Misuse Act came in. So it is irrelevant. it needs updating, and we need to have proper punitive sentences for those people who exploit the cyberspace to cause victimology. And that's one of the ongoing conversations we're having with government at the moment.
Thank you. Gentleman at the back, sir.
Sir, you've mentioned, John Ayling from the College of Policing, you've mentioned the raising of awareness of officers for conference's benefit. We've got details of the cybercrime packages that are available through the Colleges of Policing via e-learning on the stand. So if anybody would like to talk to me about that and the packages that you've said, we've got them here.
Thank you very much indeed. Any other questions at the moment? I mean, I think one of the biggest battles you've got is actually persuading your Mrs. Miggins that this is actually something the police deal with, isn't it? I mean, you know, I guess a lot of people think, well, that's got nothing to do with the police. They've just been done, and that's it, and they might well get the money back. But at the end of the day, they don't see it as a crime in which police get involved, do they?
Yeah. There will be a big public service campaign later this year or early next year, which is very much about trying to reach out to everybody who uses the internet. It's a multi-million-pound campaign which is focused just on that thing, which is focused on understanding that you're a victim of crime and knowing how to protect yourself. It's understanding where you need to go to report it, and the fact the police do have a footprint here, and the police can respond, and the police will seek out those who've committed crime.
And how realistic do you think, honestly, is your expectation, your hope, that people will go away from here and harry their chief constables and say, come on, what about all these modules we can get hold of? What about all these training exercises we can get hold of? We need to clue ourselves up on this. At a time, we keep coming back to it, but it's got to be faced at a time of austerity, at a time when there are cutbacks, at a time when money's really short.
I have every confidence in the professionalism of my superintendent colleagues that they'll go and do precisely that. But on a more serious note, you know, it's not just here I'm talking. I talk at the ACPO crime business area. I talk to ACPO summer conference with chiefs. I'll talk at Chief Constable's Council at the end of the year around this. And it's a difficult message, and it's quite an unpopular message.
But are you asking the impossible? That's what I'm saying.
No.
I mean, have they got the wherewithal to deliver this in these at the moment?
It's a case of where this fits within priorities. That's why it's really important that we're able to try and quantify the breadth and the depth of the risk. And it's, you know, chiefs won't change overnight. Some chiefs have. PCCs, and with all the PCCs nationally on Thursday of this week, to try and educate them around some of the risks of them as well. And it's, as with all these things, it's an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, okay. David from Yorkshire.
Yeah, Alan Lees from West Yorkshire.
Sorry.
Yeah. I just really building on that point, how well are PCCs bought into this process and concept? Bear in mind, the focus is very much around the local. And of course, there is this responsibility collaboratively for this approach to this quite serious subject.
Yeah, it's. I can't comment on individual PCCs because they're all very different from each other, aren't they? Really big opportunity for us on Thursday this week, where all the PCCs and chief execs, hopefully from around the country, are with us to talk about the strategic end of policing, and I have a significant slot there to talk about cyber. So we will tell them it is in the in the SPR. There's a requirement in the SPR to have an ability to respond to a nationally significant cyber incident. I'm seeking to get the SPR altered next year to say your strategic responsibility is the ability to respond to Mrs. Miggins, not just a nationally significant incident. So we will continue to work on that. My very clear message to them on Thursday is this needs to be in your police and crime plans, and if it's not, you're not carrying out your SPR responsibilities, and this needs to be enforced strategic assessments. Because once you get it into the mainstream of policing, then it's much easier to get resource moved towards it.